Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of my new podcast series, Invested. So far on this podcast, we have had the honor of sitting down with individuals who have created communities that empower others and encourage innovation. The guest with us today is no different. This episode's guest is Brett Perlmutter, who is the founder of Bulletpitch, a venture media company that provides access to disruptive, early-stage startups. Bulletpitch covers the companies that are closing early customers, raising their first rounds, and are hard at work building products that will change the way we work and live. Bulletpitch is read by thousands of investors, founders, operators, students, and startup enthusiasts every single week. In today's episode, we'll dive into Brett's journey of starting Bulletpitch while he was in college, the relationships he's fostered along the way, and what his plans are for the growth of the company. We even get a glimpse at a few other things up Brett's sleeve that he is excited to announce soon. Brett has already made incredible strides in shaking up the world of venture capital, and he's only just getting started. With that, let's get into the podcast. All right, Brett, thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to diving into the conversation.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so Brett, all over your LinkedIn and branding for Bulletpitch, the tagline is redefining venture through media. I'm curious, if you could elaborate on what that means to you and the team and what it means for you moving forward.
Absolutely. So, I almost think it's going to be helpful, and I do want to answer that question. I almost think it's going to be helpful to kind of start from the origin story of Bulletpitch, because I think what that will do for your audience is really kind of help paint a picture of what exactly Bulletpitch is and what kind of I have built with this media presence and how that then ultimately affects venture.
Yeah.
I'm going to start from the beginning here. Where essentially Bulletpitch, right, came to fruition really with a thesis, right? And the thesis was that the way that early stage, venture, early stage companies specifically are covered in the media space is missing something, right? And if you think about it, we have the TechCrunches of the world, the Forbes, or really any traditional kind of media conglomerate that focuses on startups, and you so often see the story, right? This company just raised this amount of money from these investors, right? Classic. I've read 100 of those. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that's great. But if you actually think about what early stage venture is, and I say early stage with an emphasis on that part, right? Because when we talk growth, okay, maybe you can start to go into that realm. But when we're really talking early stage, we're talking about companies that are raising money. We're talking about companies that have never been in the press before because, quite frankly, the founder's so focused on building the products that they're not going to get press attention, right? So who's covering those? And the really interesting piece there was, well, realistically, what are investors looking for? Whether you're an analyst, an associate, a partner at a VC, investors are looking for deal flow, right? And so the thought was, well, if I created a publication that one gave investors really great companies, but then two actually did diligence on the companies, chances are get a lot of investors to read this thing, right? And then the final piece was, okay, well, how do I make this for the ecosystem, not just for the investor, right? Because then it suffocates. How do I get the founder reading this? How do I get the person who's venture adjacent reading this, right? And really what it came down to was, well, let me make it accessible. Let me make it so accessible that every audience can derive a different value, right? So if you're an investor, you're, requesting an intro to a founder, right? If you're a founder, maybe you're looking at the publication, you'd be like, one, that's really cool because all of these companies, this is what they're raising at, but also, how do I get my company featured, right? And so I'm going to start with the word redefining, right? Currently in venture, right, the way traditional VC works is sourcing, right? And you know it all the time. The analysts sit there, they scrape LinkedIn, they scrape Harmonic, they scrape PitchBook, they scrape Crunchbase, and they're sourcing. What Bulletpitch has done is it's recreated this whole kind of ecosystem for me specifically where, of course, I'm still sourcing, I'm still trying to find great deals, but they start to come to us, right? And the reason why is because when these founders are reading this, they go, wait a second, I want to apply. And then it snowballs, and the next thing you know, we get hundreds of applications every month, right? And it's great because it's the same way that Y Combinator gets applications or Techstars gets applications, right? But all these companies are applying it for really investor attention, right? So that's to use the word redefining. I think there's multiple, but that's kind of the first piece, right? And so, Bulletpitch has scaled in terms of a media company, and really it's been cool because not only now, once you have distribution, this is my thing, there's a lot you can do with it, right? And so on the media side, obviously the publication has helped, numerous startups raise capital, but we've also been able to start throwing events, right? And so and you were there, we did a big event did you have fun there?
I had a great time. Yeah. Was one of the more fun New York Tech Week events, for sure.
And so we can get into my opinion around events, but the goal was to make it fun, sociable, yet really, really opportunistic for everyone there. And a lot of people walked away with a lot of quality connections, and that was the goal. And so that being said, that all stems from a distribution, right? There were a lot of people that came to that event because they saw the distribution, they saw that the power of what we do, which is connecting founders and funders. And so that really is kind of the redefinition on the media front, where it's taking venture, right? Where you see so many of these traditional VCs operate in a certain way, and it's, wait a second, how can I use media from a different angle, right? And so to kind of go one step further here, the whole piece of, at the end of the day, right, and I'm going to take this as an investor mindset, which you can also get into, but investing is a commodities game, right? Where at the end of the day, Andreessen Horowitz's capital really is no different than Sequoia's capital, no different than an angel's capital. There's no real difference. So what does it come down to? Venture comes down to, in my mind, two things: being able to add value and being able to have access, right? And the really cool part about this media company is it has created both of those things. And when you have that, that is powerful.
All right. So I appreciate the context there, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's in store. I've been a subscriber of Bulletpitch for, probably 10 or so months now. And it's already been really exciting to see the growth. As you mentioned, you had the event for New York Tech Week. It was one of the largest events, and that's saying something, because Tech Week this year was huge. You mentioned kind of the companies you feature. I'm curious, out of all of them, what has been your favorite company, or at least the most interesting company that you featured, and why? It seems like everything. I would like to know a little bit more about kind of the sourcing aspect, what it is. You mentioned over 100 applicants each month for the newsletter. How do you make that determination? And then the original question of what's been your favorite company to feature?
Let's go from there. So big shout out to CEO of JB Coffee, James. This was one of those where there was something special, I think. And people always ask me, they're like, what was the pivotal point where you knew that Bulletpitch wasn't just, a way to kind of break into the venture game, but actually a way to kind of, right? And I think I remember vividly hopping on the phone one evening with the guys from JB Coffee, and they're explaining that at the time, and they've pivoted a little bit since, and they're doing great. Their CBD coffee brand. And I thought it was a really interesting concept. I thought our audience would get really excited about it. And I remember that we had the holiday time, and they were one of our first features of January last year. And it's crazy. It's been now a year since we've done a feature on them. And I remember sending out that letter within the first maybe 15 minutes. And we'd had these before, but not at this extent. I'd love to meet the founders. Right? All of these really interesting VCs and angel investors, right? And key piece, they're angel investors who loved what they were doing and saw that they were really early, but doing something really exciting. And we make the introductions. We were like, wow, this is incredible. And then, I go about the next thing, right? It's time to write the next newsletter. I think at that point I was planning for an event in New York, one of our first events in New York City. So I was kind of like, that was great. That was really cool. On to the next.
Right.
And I think probably 2 weeks later, I opened LinkedIn, and I didn't ask the founders to do this. I actually hadn't even heard from them. We just want to thank Bulletpitch, because within the last 2 weeks, we've gotten more interest and funding than in the prior two.
Yeah. Wow.
Unsolicited. And all of a sudden, I'm just sitting there and I'm like, wait a second. This is unbelievable. how many other companies have I actually and we knew to an extent, but it occurred to me at that moment that, oh my God, we're really helping companies get funded. And at the end of the day, it makes perfect sense.
Right. Yeah.
There are many venture firms out there, many angel investors, maybe many syndicates, but yet there are many companies. And so it's impossible to actually know everything. I don't know every VC that exists. I'm sure you don't. I don't think anyone actually does.
Yeah.
And similarly, I don't know every company that's out there. But what I do know is that when we put a company in the newsletter, right? A company talks to 99 investors, the 100 says yes. I do that to a magnitude. And so by default, when we run a company through the publication, obviously it has to be a good one. I mean, it's unbelievable because there are going to be VCs that are interested. Right. And I think it was at that point that I was like, wow. So is Jimmy one of my favorite companies? I love them to death. I love all the companies we ran to death. But
yeah, there
was something special in the coffee, I'd say instead of the water, that for that one specifically. And then to your second question about kind of, this is a question I get asked a lot, right? Like, how do you decide, right? And I think that anyone at the tech stars of the world, right, have good relationship with those guys. Why Combinator, like, they'll tell you that they've got a lot of volume, right? And when it comes to volume, I think, candidly, a lot of it is not exactly in my wheelhouse. But when you get volume, you get great companies. And I think it's, we have on our back end, we have actually an algorithm. We have an AI that kind of like will sort through a couple things to begin with. So like if the company's not in our realm, it'll already get kind of kicked to the second bit. But I treat, on the media side, I treat companies like I'm a VC, right? And we see really great companies and we say, okay, that's a really interesting one. We're going to mark that as do further diligence. Okay, it's a really good company. Let's actually take them to a conversation, have a conversation with the founder, sends me some more materials that we say, okay, that's a really great company to write on, right?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And the aspect you mentioned earlier, just with the distribution, I think for any investor reading it, knowing that that's the process that you go through, it establishes a lot more credibility for the companies, knowing that it's been a little bit more vetted, knowing that it meets, the standards that you've set. And I think for right now, it could be challenging for you because you've had such interesting companies in the past that you've featured. And I think it's always a challenge there. But the fact that you keep on doing it week in, week out, is really impressive. So you mentioned, of course, the coffee, but is there any other company that you've directly seen an impact in terms of raising capital or anything else? I know the coffee one you said was January of last year.
Yeah.
But we're just kind of curious kind of how often you are part of that process.
Yeah, so companies have now raised, aggregate wise, millions of dollars through the newsletter. It felt like a very special example because maybe it was the first time, but and I don't want to disclose names and exact numbers, but let's just call it like there have been companies, some from this summer, hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment being featured. And it's just one of those things where and I don't know if I can ever say that Bulletpitch released, the credit behind it, right? Because maybe they would have been found. The point is though, is that it feels like the catalyst for it, right? And I don't need to sit there and say to these companies, see, told you, or I don't need to sit to these investors and be like, well, I guess you're going to come to me again. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is, if I can further if I can further the ecosystem in a positive way, that shows value. And that's really, really powerful. And that's what I'm trying to build. I'm not trying to build look, I told you so. I'm trying to build let's add a lot of value to the ecosystem. And when there's trust, mutual trust in that ecosystem, there's a lot of great things you can do with it.
Totally. Venture, the business world holistically, it's a relationships game, and relationships are long-term. And I think the beauty of what you've done for so long is that you are just creating that goodwill for companies. You're creating those relationships with the founders, with the VCs, and you're just providing a ton of value.
And by the way,
people remember that.
Also with the brands, right? And this is a really cool part of the business is we do make money, right, on brands. That is how this entire company works.
Sure.
And we have good faith with all the brands we work with too. And it's funny because there are a lot of, so in the newsletter media space, right, there are some brands that try to hit the business audience, right? But everyone's trying to grab for the same fruit. And what's really cool is because I have niched myself off, I work with brands that I assure you no other newsletter is working with. But we're able to do it because I'm throwing events with that. And we're able to do it because my audience is different than everyone else's audience, right? Like my audience isn't Morning Brew's audience, right? My audience is truly a niched down audience specific to venture.
Right. No, that's super interesting. Talking about your audience, you've built out an amazing audience of investors and operators from the top VCs and startups in the space. How have you curated such a select and top tier following, reader base? I mean, the fact that it's where it is now after a relatively short period of time, when you look at, the venture media space in general, I'm just curious from your perspective, how you think you've been able to curate such a top tier audience.
I think it comes down to two things. The first being that, right, and I discussed this at kind of the beginning of our conversation, that there was a white space. I mean, people really weren't focusing on companies that were raising money. And it's funny because since Bulletpitch has started, there have been copycats. There have been probably 5 or 6 that I can name off the top of my head that like have fully tried to do it. And, they've been like, we're doing this in this geography, or we're doing it in this country. Right. But it's like, that's great because that means that there really was a need. There was a real need in the market for people who wanted to know this stuff, right? All these VCs wanted these newsletters in their inbox. So from that perspective, is one. And then 2 is content, right? Like, obviously the companies speak volume, but I think the format, right? Like at the end of the day, it is such a concise and easy format to understand that it feels acceptable, right? And like, there's this whole piece, and like, don't even get me started on the other side of this, right? Where it's like the whole accredited investor, like at the end of the day, venture in the private markets feel very, even though they're really not that complicated, they feel very intricate, right? And I think that the great thing about a show like Shark Tank, right, is that it makes entrepreneurship accessible, right? And people get really Problem with Shark Tank is that it's not really like the classic like no VC would invest in any company that's ever been through Shark. Right.
Yes.
But there's something to be said that people love this stuff. Whether you're a traditional VC, whether you're an angel investor, right? I mean, think about how many doctors, lawyers, are out there that are accredited investors, and they don't even know what that is. But yet they're throwing 5, 10K checks at Tesla, and when in reality, right? Like, why not invest in a venture, an actual like startup? I mean, what a cool opportunity. And they actually can do that as accredited investors. They just might not recognize that, right? So I think there's a big piece around like the accessibility of venture that a lot of people, I think, have come to really appreciate in what we're kind of doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as someone who's not personally an accredited investor yet, it is really just interesting to even get that glimpse at it and how it works. And I really like the point of what you said earlier in terms of it's not that complex. And I think it's one of those things that people create this facade for it to almost keep people out. And, that's a whole other conversation about the democratization, that movement. I mean, we've seen things like sweater ventures and all of that to kind of change that landscape. But I think it's just really interesting, and it's inspiring a lot of other people. I saw one of the quotes on your website is, through reading Bulletpitch, I now have decided that I want to work for a startup after graduation. That was what a reader said. And I think it's just really interesting that you're opening people's eyes to the opportunities that are there, because I think just in education in general, especially in higher education in college, you're kind of, depending on where you go, it's like the set of 10 companies. Then you're like, oh, well, if I'm not in one of those, I'm an outcast. So it's an interesting put.
It's funny because I actually haven't had this thought in a while, because I think I've been so buried in the just build a media company, build, everything else. But it's really interesting because when you really zoom out, a college kid, right, they're told that they either need to go into banking or consulting, right? And it's so funny because it's like, you see all these people who go into banking for 2 years, good for them. But they come out and they go, oh, I kind of want to go work for a startup. Like, that seems interesting. And it's like, you could have started with that. And it's just like, it's such an interesting dynamic, because it's like, this space feels like it's something And in fact, you know what? For if you have students as an audience, I feel like I need to say this outright. If you want to get into this space, right? And my friend Zara will agree with me because and there's people, right, who I've seen who've done a really kind of good job of breaking into venture. If you want this bad enough, you can do this. Like there is definitely a barrier to entry. But at the end of the day, if you are entrepreneurial and you are passionate about this stuff, right? This is a space full of passionate people, right? No one's just waltzing into that. It's not like and again, that sector is a different sector. It's not the banking to private equity where it's like, I'm going to do this for 2 years, I'm going to do this for 2 years, and that's just what everyone else does. This is, you can do this, but you got to veer off the path. And I think that making venture and entrepreneurship mainstream has actually been a cool byproduct of Bulletpitch. But great, because people should be going to start companies. People should be going to work for VCs. This is one of the most exciting industries, right? Like being early in a great company, being along for the ride, how spectacular.
Right. Totally. Yeah, and I think when you mentioned just about the passion and all of that, and how people, after 2 years of doing a job they don't maybe enjoy as much, that's when they decide to make that leap. And I think it's never too late. It's never too early also, though, to make that leap. And especially within the venture space, and this is kind of where I've dabbled a bit, is just, it's some quote that I've seen, but it's like, do the job you want before you actually have it. And I think especially in venture, there's so many opportunities for that, whether you're a growth scout, whether you're, just sending deal flow to an investor that you follow on Twitter. There's so many different things, creating YouTube videos about it, a new startup or anything like that. There's so many opportunities to provide that value that then opens those doors much more than in any other industry. It's not like in banking, you can say, hey, I think this company wants to merge with this company.
100%.
Go handle this, Jamie.
And exactly. Yeah, it's great because at the end of the day, it's a social business, right? And it's like, it really is amazing because it's like, you and I are going back and forth and I'm like, you should come to our Tech Week event. You come to our Tech Week event, you meet something really cool. Next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, I don't even work in venture. But like, here I am hanging out with all these venture people, meeting people, and that's what it's all about. And again, it goes back to the idea of value add, right? If you're adding value to people, whether it's founders, investors, whatever it is, if you're adding value to the ecosystem, you're welcome. And that is just what that is.
Right. Totally. So again, you mentioned the Tech Week event. Tech Week is always very fun. But recently on Twitter, or I should say X and LinkedIn, you've announced that through Bulletpitch, you want to start hosting industry events, industry dinners with founders and funders. And again, you had that great show out for Tech Week. I'm curious, in a business that is so inherently digital in terms of a newsletter, what is kind of the motivation behind this push for the in-person events?
It's a good question. So I had this realization maybe 3 or 4 months ago, right? And it was probably right after Tech Week, to be honest with you, where I know what's going on in the ecosystem, right? And I don't think anyone questions that because I've been able to put my finger on the pulse of it, right? Whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through the newsletter, whether it's through applications, whether it's through meeting investors. And yet I think that there's something to be said about putting your boots on the ground. Now, I know how other VCs operate, and I don't care to understand fully why they operate like this. But what you see a lot is when there's an event, an analyst gets sent, an associate gets sent, right? I think that meeting people in person and really actually going above and you don't know what's really going on. And I'm going to give you a great example of this until you really go there. And so here's the best example of this that I think I can come up with. And I think probably would be the best example, period. Are you familiar with what's going on in El Segundo?
I'm not.
Okay.
Actually.
So
I'm not familiar with what's going on.
So I was familiar enough to know that there's a lot of interesting hard tech and deep tech going on out in El Segundo. And I had the luxury of when I was out in Los Angeles, which by the way, I threw an event out there purely with the thesis. Everyone's like, oh, like, why are you doing an event here? It's like, because I want to know what's happening here. And I not know, even though I think I know, I don't know what's happening here. I prove myself right. And so I throw an event and I get to meet all of you wonderful people. So 2 days before the event, a founder takes me on a tour of El Segundo. And I've never been so blown away in my life El Segundo is this hard tech, deep tech hub right now where all of these amazing founders are building these companies that are literally game changing, all in like these really interesting, like they all have their labs. And the best part is like in this little, call it 5 to 6 block area, there are probably 12 to 15 founders that are all best friends that are all building these incredible venture-backed companies. And they're like sharing drones, fixing each other's drones, sharing metal parts. Like I've never seen anything like it. And I went to go meet with the founder that I was going to meet with and make sure that they're doing well. And of course I saw their lab, but half of it was literally being able to hang out with all the people who I didn't even know existed and seeing what's going on there. And it felt like what Silicon Valley was 20 years ago. And it was like, at that moment, it was like, wow. There is so much going on that you don't know about. And you can even say, yeah, I know that all the deep tech and hard tech's in El Segundo.
Sure.
There's been guys out front who really have crushed it and understand the ecosystem inside and out. But like, unless you step foot in that 6 block ratio, you don't know what's going on. You can't.
Yeah.
And so the industry dinners that we're doing, which are going to be really great, shout out to Fidelity for sponsoring. The goal is to bring people together in a really unique way. And even though you kind of know what's going on, you don't really know what's going on until you're with people in a really great space. And so really excited for these dinners. We've got actually the first one set up. We're doing a deep tech and SaaS one on February 6th. The consumer one's going to be a fun one because I think the amount of applications I got for the consumer one probably any other, which speaks again, I guess, a little bit to what industries excite me. But so there's we're doing a big event for South by Southwest as well. I'm throwing a carnival, partnering with Antler on it. It's gonna be really fun. We've got a lot of great sponsors in there. And again, the goal is to like bring the community together, do it in a really fun and creative way. And that's what like these dinners, these events are about. Like it's about taking the classic like panel, right? And saying there's enough panels in the world. We don't need another channel.
Yeah.
Let's find a way to connect people in a really kind of intentional way. And that's what these are all about.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, being part of the class of students that moved to New York after COVID and being in school during, missing out on several semesters of in-person interaction, kind of that traditional experience. When I moved to New York in July of 2022, I really just saw that thirst and that hunger for that in-person interaction. Yes, it is great to communicate over a video chat and to exchange messages on X and things like that. But there's something about being in person and just having those conversations that really just can't be matched. So I think the example of El Segundo is extremely impressive because, yes, you could read about, XYZ raised this money, they're developing this, but you don't truly see that community. You don't see, the energy unless you're there in person. So I think that makes total sense. That's the direction that Bulletpitch is looking to go. And that kind of leads us into the next question. So I'm curious, just what's next? You've been dropping hints all over that, something big is in store. I also saw on LinkedIn that you have invested in some of the companies that you featured in Bulletpitch. Was that part of the plan? Is that part of the plan moving forward? Can you just kind of share a little bit about what's in store? We're right at the beginning of 2024. What can we look forward to from your end?
So I'm gonna try to give it a good analogy, right? What I've done over the last 2 years is I've built a wall. I've built a 4-sided wall, and this wall revolves around access and value add, right? Where by building a distribution, I'm able to host these events. And I'm able to see these really great companies, and I'm able to have founders coming up to me, right? I just got an email moments before we started of actually past founders been featured in the newsletter asking what other ways we can work together, right? And I think what's really exciting about that is by building this kind of moat, right? It allows me to put something right in the center of it, right? And so the media company is going to keep doing great events, and the media company is going to keep putting out great content.
Right.
Because of where I've positioned myself, I think that anyone who I've talked to who is curious on next steps, the question always becomes, Brett, when are you going to start investing? Right. And very naturally, because I built up these really great relationships with tons of different LPs, that step is kind of here. And I've been keeping it stealthy very intentionally. It's still going to be stealthy where when you post this, right, like people are going to be like, so like, where is it? It's stuff.
Yeah.
And the intention is to get some really, really great deals done before I kind of launch this to the world. But I started a syndicate. And the syndicate sits kind of right in that wall of having built a great media company. It allows me to be a really strong GP. And so I'm really excited about, the first couple of deals that have kind of gone down. I'm really excited about all the LPs that are part of this syndicate. And so there's a lot more to come on that. But the bottom line is that you're going to start seeing the words GP and my name next to each other pretty frequently.
Perfect. Well, I look forward to that and following that journey. I think, it's different, but a lot of your story actually reminds me of, the Ashton Kutchers and the celebrity turned VCs, the Chainsmokers, for example. These people who already have an audience, and granted, their audiences were in traditional media, whether it was TV or music, but they had an audience nonetheless, and they leveraged that audience to then, lift up and promote, not a product necessarily, but the service, and just the fact that you have that is a major competitive advantage. So, and that's something that you touched on earlier. And so much of just the venture game is your relationships and the service that you can provide. Because as you said, the $1 million from Sequoia is the same as the $1 million from Andreessen, but it comes down to what comes along with that. And I think being connected to somebody like you, being affiliated with something like Bulletpitch, it just creates so much of that opportunity. So I think that's a super smart and exciting idea.
Look, the playbook has been done. You look at Harry Stebbings. He built a media company, and then he was able to kind of become a force and venture onto himself, right? And I think what's really cool is that it's very similar where I built a media company. And so now, and what's cool too is like, right, by building this media company, it's built me, right? And it's like, it's really interesting because if someone were to say to me today, Brett, I want to go build a media company, first thing I'd say, okay, so what social channel do you have the biggest following on? Where are you going to kind of drip people in from? I actually built Bulletpitch Reverse, which is ask any media person, insane. But I didn't know what I didn't know.
In terms of go email first.
Right. And then and now it's like I have a following on Twitter, which is very cool. To all the people that follow me on Twitter, I love it. I love interacting with them, and it's very cool to do so. But it's really interesting because I built it reverse. But by building the media company, it's kind of built me as a credible source, right? And it's kind of cool because it's like Bulletpitch exists as a great brand. But what's cool is that Bulletpitch has now built my brand, right? And so because of that, it's allowing me to do really interesting things. Obviously, people knowing my background of what I've been able to build and accomplish before that, which is how it kind of does itself.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. You're right. I never even thought about that. But, the fact that you started off on the hardest medium, in terms of getting people to sign up for a newsletter and emails and things like that, that's what every creator aspires to get to. If you listen to Ali Abdaal and Sahil Bloom and that world, it's all about the funnel to get their email. And when you have someone's email, you have a lot more opportunity there. So the fact that you already have that and have created that relationship is, kudos to you. That was something that I hadn't even considered, but that...
And, it's really interesting because, so the other day, someone asked me if this big, well-known person was subscribed to Bulletpitch, of which I said yes. And I pulled up this person's kind of profile on Bulletpitch and kind of started going through this person. I was like, I think a 97% open rate. And I was trying to explain to them, and I didn't even know this was going to happen, like how I can see what they're clicking on and I can see what they've opened. And I was showing the person kind of going back to like, this is what I think it was like, we featured this company in June. And then notably, this person clicked on a company that we had featured probably 4 months earlier, 4 months later. And I was like, wow. And apparently I know that this person's still interested in this company because now they're going back in time, right? And I think this is what I realized about Bulletpitch is at the beginning, and I mean very early on, right? I was so focused on Bulletpitch being like, all right, this is how many people are reading it. This is how many people read it in an hour. I don't even look anymore at the statistics probably until 2 or 3 weeks later, because what's occurred to me is people use it as a tool. They use it as a tool even more than they do as entertainment, right? And so it's really interesting because it's like people will see something, they'll bookmark it, and they'll come back to it 4 months later. And it's like, whoa, that's an unexpected result. But one that, again, goes back to being able to own your audience, and all these great creators like Sahel Bloom, and they know the power of owning your own audience. And what's really nice is like the playbook's been done by a lot of these podcasts that have gone kind of media venture. It's pretty shocking that no one's really tried to do. I mean, people have, like, you know, some's got a syndicate, but like no one's really tried to lean into the owning your audience piece. But it's like, it's so easy because, you know, when I throw my event in Austin, you damn well bet I'm going to segment the entire audience of Texas and let them in a separate email say, hey guys, I'm hosting this event here. Right. And I have the power to do that.
Yeah. No, that's the way to go. Kind of shifting directions here. I mean, you yourself are a founder of, you know, you've created some amazing things at a young age. A lot of my audience is aspiring professionals, students in college, students in high school. I'm curious, just what advice do you have for them, for students who maybe want to start their own entrepreneurial journey, or just advice in general to someone as they're embarking on such an exciting part of their lives?
Let's go to the word imposter syndrome.
Okay.
I think it's funny because every time it's like, oh, I think I'm probably past that stage, I do something else that I realize that I definitely have imposter syndrome in right now. And like, well, one of them recently was investing, you know? It's like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing that now. But at the end of the day, right, what I've learned is anyone's capable, right? I mean, truly, if you are passionate about something, people will take you seriously, right? And at the beginning, right, like I had to play, right, and you know this, I built Bulletpitch out of my dorm room. Like I had to play the like student, you know, really like learning and so, you know, such. But at a certain point, if you are so passionate and believe so deeply in something, people start to see that, right? Yeah. People start to see that over anything else. And of course, with time comes credibility, right? And so at the end of the day, right, like I'm 23 years old.
Yeah.
But no one's asking me anymore. I mean, people are just like, you're 23, but no one's asking me anymore. It's like, why should I trust this 23-year-old? Because there's no question in anyone's mind, I think, or I'm sure there are, but like, it's become the thing where a lot of the people that I interact with, it's not how old are you, it's wow, Bulletpitch, wow, all of this stuff that you're doing, right? And so at a certain point, what you do speaks louder than who you are. But I think at the end of the day, like when you start something, there's always going to be the imposter syndrome. But that's not a bad thing, right? Like I think it's my superpower to be young and to be in this game and to, you know, like I had dinner with some really interesting GPs recently, and the biggest thing that every one of them concurred on was they wish they got into the game earlier, right? And it's like this really cool thing where like whether you're a high school student thinking about starting something, I'm actually getting dinner tonight with these two co-founders. One just dropped out of Stanford to start something, right? Like it's an amazing piece because it's like at the end of the day, like this girl dropped out of Stanford. She posted a tweet that she was moving to New York City and that she was building.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it is no longer about Stanford dropout, cool rain. But like at the end of the day, right? Like it becomes this thing where if you're doing something interesting, people want to know what you're doing and people want to talk to you about it. And if you are able, and this is really what it comes down to, if you are able to show value and be able to really know what you're talking about, no one's questioning how old you are. Right. I mean, the average, I imagine that and it's too small of a sample size right now, though it does check this box, but over the next year and a half, I imagine that the average age of the founders I'm going to invest in is probably going to be about 25, right?
Yeah.
And it's younger right now. And, you know, when did Zuckerberg start Facebook, right? Like most of these brilliant minds and these people who are doing really cool things, whether you don't have to be starting Facebook to say that. Being young is an advantage, but these New York City killers that I know out here that are absolutely changing the world as we speak. I don't think anyone's over the age of like 27,
Right.
Like,
sure.
This is a young person's game, right? And so I think that being young is an advantage. And I think that anyone who's thinking about starting something, creating something, assisting with something, when is a better time to do this than now?
Totally. I think that's amazing advice. And something that I honestly needed to hear, because just in the world that I come from, where it is so much just about your timeline, your tenure, it's important to remember, let's just go out here and make things happen.
Yep. And also,
actions speak louder than words. And honestly, your resume of your school, your graduation date, that's just a word. So
and honestly, right, like, you're a product of who you spend your time with, right? And so
totally,
being in New York City right now and being around these people who are truly exceptional. I got dinner with a buddy the other night who's running this off the charts marketing agency. I go back, I've slammed 4 hours of work because I'm so invigorated by our conversation.
Oh yeah.
What else? Like, if you can find the people, and there are people in New York City who are doing, and SF and LA and Denver and anywhere, Boston, that are doing really amazing things, and you spend time with them, it's just like you're the product of the people you spend time with.
Totally. Well, you recently moved to New York, because I know when I first was speaking with you, you weren't in the New York area living here. How has that changed? Kind of just you mentioned your energy and that's something I totally related to and made some content about. But how has that just changed your outlook on how to approach Bulletpitch, how to approach your career, just being in a place like New York?
Building Bulletpitch not in New York was having one hand tied behind my back, right?
Oh yeah.
Because at the end of the day, venture is a social game, and New York is a social place. And me coming here, and maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't.
Yeah.
The way the brand has scaled over the last 6 months is greater than probably the prior year and a half.
Yeah.
And that is just a product of my environment. Truly.
Right.
And I'm traveling a bunch now, and it's like all of the sudden, I now have both hands.
Yeah.
And I assure you that over the next 6 months, it's just going to get even better.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see that. Finishing off with just the final question. I mean, you get the hundreds of applications for Bulletpitch in terms of founders who want their company ahead of you or in front of your audience. So that means you're kind of on the cutting edge of what people are building, what's in store. I'm curious what you think the biggest prediction is for 2024 and beyond. What is kind of a common theme that you're seeing in those applications to be featured, and I guess just what are you observing in the world that you sit in?
So I'm going to attack this question as an investor and a creator. Okay. My prediction is that we're going to see a huge shakeup in the creator economy. And I think that what we're going to see right now is there's a lot of I've been seeing a lot of creator economy companies, but specifically, I think there's going to be a big push towards owning your audience in a more engaging way. And I think that right now there's a lot of noise where a lot of people have gotten in the newsletter game. I'm speaking as a creator who understands that.
The podcast game.
I think we're going to start to see some different companies that are trying to start to find ways to raise audience engagement. And I think that that's going to be a really interesting market, because if you look at kind of the current audience engagement tools, you have email and you have text messaging. And I think that what's going to be really interesting over the next 12 to 18 months is I think people are going to continue to innovate in those two areas, specifically like allowing creators to reach their audiences, right? And then I think like the other play is I think there's going to be a huge push towards like tools that allow kind of creators to more easily do marketing and do, I've been seeing a lot of those. Been seeing some companies that are really trying to disrupt these longs. I mean, of course, you've got the deep tech stuff, right? Disrupt the sleepy industries. But I also think that there's like some really interesting companies that are, even I'm thinking like in the CPG space that have seen the same thing been done for 20 years, right? So like the same bottle, the same can, and they're like, we're done. We really want
Yeah.
to shake things up, and we want to completely do things a different way. And I think we're going to see a lot of disruption actually in the CPG space as well. Specifically, right, because CPG is a lot about branding. I think specifically branding versus products. But I think this is going to be a fun 2024, and I'm hoping that the market starts to heat up a little bit.
It's looking promising.
Yeah, people keep saying, Q2 maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm an optimist at heart.
Yeah, good deals are always going to be there. Always.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if anything, you touched on the creator economy, of course. That was huge. There's the trends for every year. 22, people would say, was the year of the creator economy. So you're recommending that it'll be a resurgence, and I certainly hope so. And as someone sitting in the creator economy space, but I think if anything, the way the fundraising environment is right now, you really have to be strong. You have to be a good company to survive. So if anything, make you feel a little bit more confident, because the people that you actually are seeing that have raised, it makes you more confident that they will be around, that they are cash flow positive, things like that. Whereas a few years ago, that might not have been the case.
Honestly,
and you could really market off of just an idea.
This is something that I so deeply believe. Companies need capital to scale, not because they're starving, right? And at the end of the day, the companies that really are going to use capital efficiently to scale are the best companies. And the companies that are we need capital to just exist. I have an idea. Those are not good companies. You want to see the companies that no matter what happens, they're going to be able to survive.
Yeah, totally. So, okay. You heard it here first, folks. Creator economy is coming back for 2024. As two people in the creator economy space, we can be very grateful for that. But that was the rest of my questions, Brett. I'm curious, if you had any final advice for the audience. And on another note, just where can people learn more about Bulletpitch? Where can people follow you? Stay tuned for all the amazing things and exciting things that are in store for 2024.
Yeah, at this point, Brett Perl on Twitter. That's where I'm hanging out.
Yeah.
Obviously, stay subscribed to the newsletter. LinkedIn's actually that's my other big prediction for 2024.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to lean into LinkedIn stuff because I did one post, I think yesterday, and I had 60 or 70 people follow me from one post. And I was it's a really interesting channel, and it's so organic.
Right.
And I think people are afraid to post on LinkedIn, but whatever. I'm not.
I'm in the same ballpark. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's going to be a big 2024 for the venture space, and I love doing these, and I hope you get so many other awesome guests on this. Because podcasting is a great way for people to just hang out and chat.
Totally. Well, Brett, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everything you're doing in the venture space. Can't wait to continue to cheer you on in the future.
Appreciate it.